Hooked on Life, the podcast, is a division of PN Entertainment Canada, inspiring innovation through entertainment.
The opinions expressed in Hooked on Life are for conversational purposes only. This podcast may also contain language that some may find offensive. Now, on to the show.
Hey, I'm Cindy Lynn. I'm a free spirit that is headed into my 50s with abandon. I was an artist who had a midlife break when I turned 37. I left a toxic marriage and moved across the country with 2 kids, no money, and no job. I decided to start life over again on my own terms. I found sobriety, learned to like myself, to show up for my friends and family, found a home in the corporate world, fell in love with my junior high school sweetie Shay. I practice saying yes every day and love being a badass.
And I'm Shane. Shaner. Or as my wife calls me, Shay Bear. I am British, and I came close to becoming an American, but I'm Canadian. I'm a musician who got lost in the lifestyle and sobered up years ago. I got married to my girlfriend from middle school, but don't worry, we were grown-ups by then. We travel a lot, we own property far, far away, and this podcast was her idea. With all that said, welcome to Hooked on Life.
Are you waiting for the magic to happen?
The magic?
Yeah, the magic of Podcastville.
Of Podcastville.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. Am I waiting? Yeah.
I said, are you ready?
Oh, I thought you said I'm
Oh, I might have said
Are you waiting?
Oh, God.
Maybe you said ready. We'll play that back. Simon will let me know what you said, okay?
You know what it is? I haven't really talked much this morning, so I'm sort of warming my mouth up.
You sound like Kathleen Turner, but that's pretty sexy.
Is it?
Yeah, that's okay.
I've never thought she was overly sexy, though.
Okay, well, you're missing out.
Do you know I saw her in The Graduate, and she played Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
And I saw her buck naked.
There you go.
Full frontal nudity.
My goodness. Is she still around?
I don't know, but wait, let me get to the end of the story.
Okay.
She had the most mannish shape.
We are going to have a lawyer call us after this, I'm sure. God.
Okay, listen. Today, well, you know what? Oh my God. Let's just get started. Ready?
Yes.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening from. We are Cindy Lynn and the Shay Bear, and we are perpetually excited to have you join us on our next episode of Hooked on Life, the podcast.
Very nice.
Thank you. I should pre-plan it.
Just to tag team what you had said, I was maybe 12, and there was a TV newscaster anchor in Calgary, and that's as far as I will say. And
you're not going to say?
No, I'm not going to say that. It was a man for sure, and had come out of the sauna of the education place that we were at. My old man and I had taken me to for swimming. We would go there often, and he was this gentleman I'm talking about. It was a very large man, like, I don't know, 6'4". He was big, and he was quite rotund too. He was a very big man, and he came out of the sauna absolutely just buck naked. Buck naked? Yeah, he was naked, and
full frontal, baby.
I was totally shocked. He was totally comfortable. I was totally not comfortable. I was totally not. What the hell? You're on TV, and now you're in front of me buck naked.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So who was he again?
I'm not going to say.
Oh, I thought you would say.
Anyway, I always think to myself, I'm pretty comfortable with buck nakedness until I go to a place where they're naked, and I'm like, hey, this isn't cool.
It's not for you, hey?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not like a naked beach place person.
I did a show buck naked.
Okay.
In a very small theater.
Okay.
And gaining the confidence and peace to be able to do that, it was a real mental journey for me.
Jesus.
Yeah.
There you go.
Speaking of that.
Of nakedness?
Speaking of theater.
Okay.
I want to talk a little this morning about opportunities and how we as Gen Xers really forged our own opportunities, especially you and I as artists. When I look back at my life, I didn't take the traditional route. The boy is getting ready to go off to university and to take his path of going to school, and then he graduates and then he gets a job. And that really wasn't my path. And I don't think it was your path either, especially as artists. We had to really create work for ourselves and create opportunities so we weren't just sitting at home. I know for myself, I created my own theater school, basically, because I thought that would be cool and it was something that I was really interested in. And when I was interested in working with certain kinds of people in the theater and doing certain kinds of work in the theater, I created my own theater company because what I was interested in wasn't being created in Calgary. I was interested in like New York studio theater, gritty, raw work. That wasn't being done in Calgary. So I created my own theater company. And, even when I moved to Toronto, I didn't wait for someone to hire me to teach. I just took opportunity into my own hands. And you've had a similar experience with your music, correct?
Oh, for sure. In Calgary, we were kind of doing our own promotions and stuff like that, but our lead singer and our bass player at the time of the Household Saints were really kind of the driving force of finding gigs. And I could have learned more, and I didn't because I was young and stupid at the time when I could have been more of assistance to that type of thing. But then I moved into Toronto and everybody's just hustling to try to find a gig that actually has pay. I went from Calgary and we were making money every night, and here we had to go find money. And so, making handbills, like literally making the handbills and then making 10 on a sheet and cutting them in 10 separate pieces and then handing them out to friends and make 200-300 at a time. And then making posters and putting them on Queen Street, Richmond, all over the Spadina, just to drive a crowd to the bar that you're playing, not to mention having to work 9 till 6 selling gear all day, so for 40 hours. So it wasn't a 40-hour job. It was, with rehearsals and everything else too. At one point we're pulling 60-70 hours a week, all encompassing trying to get things going. So I understand what you're saying. It's trying to entrepreneurship on an artist level. It's very difficult. And, I wonder if part of that is just our Gen X upbringing,
that we weren't afraid to just try things and be bold in order to get what we wanted.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say Gen X. I would say survival. It was just fucking survival. Post-war Germany, they were having to clean up the streets after years of destruction, right? And it took decades to get that straightened out. Like D-Day, the beaches of D-Day weren't even cleaned up 10 years after that. There was pictures in history books that show that the ships that were sunk or fought on D-Day were still there in the 1950s, which is unreal. So it's just a survival, just trying to keep moving forward, right? If you're working in the arts, you're not going to make a lot of money.
Yes. Especially in Canada.
Yeah, well, even in the States, it's a hit and miss. We have quite a few friends that work and have gigs down in the States, and then they come back to Canada and they're bartending. They're trying to do what they can to survive. So, I feel like the arts are not supported financially or otherwise, and everyone's trying to make a buck, and they end up with less than a buck at the end of the day.
Yeah, we were talking yesterday about the writer's strike and the impending SAG strike, and we'll see what comes of it. But it's about time. You have these studio heads that make so much money, and even though Meryl Streep makes a lot of money, think about the producer or the studio head above her and what he's making.
Who's going to the theater anymore?
Yeah.
Like, we went to a theater a little while ago, not long while ago, a little while ago, and it was half empty.
Yeah.
So where's the money? So the money is in streaming. So this is where they want money from us. As a musician, it reminds me of the Napster days, right? They're trying to figure out how to make money on the internet as it just came out. Metallica was kind of a leading force in saying, like, we want money too, right? There was a time when you and I were growing up and we would put cassette tapes and make, the mixtapes, right?
That's right.
And no one was making money off of that. Michael Jackson wasn't making any money off of Beat It on my mixtape that you made for me.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And now we're in a whole new genre, in a whole new generation of music and money and streaming and now movies.
Yeah. Well, today we have just a dynamo in terms of someone that was a talented artist and not okay to sit by the phone waiting for their agent to call, but really did drum a career out of creating their own opportunities and is what I would call a multifaceted artist. Are you ready?
Am I ready?
Yeah, are you ready?
I'm ready.
So our guest today has appeared in more than 120 different film and television projects, in addition to theater productions and in addition to heading their own award-winning band. Their first job in television was with a CBC show called The Newsroom, and they went on to then star in a Canadian television series called Train 48 on Global.
That's how I know him.
Their first film was with Andy Jones and Mary Walsh in The Extraordinary Visitor in 1998, directed by John Doyle. It debuted at the Toronto International Film Festival. They went on to do roles in Blind Spot, Titans, The Dresden Files, Grey's Anatomy, Hudson and Rex, Rookie Blue, and the list goes on, including the Canadian actor favorite, Murdoch Mysteries. I don't know a Canadian actor that hasn't done an episode of Murdoch Mysteries.
Well, I haven't been on it, but I'm not an actor.
Moving over to their theater career, this artist created a one-man Hamlet solo show that was directed by Robert Ross Parker, and it has been performed across Canada, including an engagement at the National Arts Centre. In 2013, it went to the UK as part of the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, New York City, including some off-Broadway slots, and is the subject of a documentary directed by Jeff Stevenson, was nominated for a Gemini Award. He wrote, I believe, a musical, Life, Death, and the Blues, which was produced by Theatre Passé Morale in Toronto, toured across Canada for over 100 performances, was the winner of the Dora Moore Award and the Betty Mitchell Award, and it featured a live band on stage. His co-star was Juno Award winner Divine Brown. Now let's go to his music career. He is the frontman of the Maple Blues Award-winning blues band, Raoul and the Big Time, which was formed in 1998. They have released Big Time Blues, Cold Outside, You My People, Blue Midnight through Big Time Records, and they have recorded with members of Canned Heat and the Mavis Staples Band. Very excited to sit down with such a dynamic and driven Canadian artist. Today, we welcome Raoul Bhaneja.
You know what's so wonderful is that the way you described him and all those things, and I just know him as Raoul. Because, I mean, him and I go way fucking back. And I'm so thrilled that you're excited to see him. And I'm so thrilled to see him. And he knows me from the short hair days.
Oh, my goodness. That's a long time ago.
Yeah, that's a long fucking time ago. Oh, my God. I'm so glad he'll be on our show today. This is great. Great. Okay. Should we take a quick break and then we'll get him in here or what?
Yes, let's do that.
Awesome. Okay. Be prepared, folks. Raoul Bhaneja will be with us just after this. You're listening to
Hooked on Life.
Hey, listener. Yes, you. I'm talking to you. Are you sitting there wondering how you can be a part of Hooked on Life? We are looking for corporations and people. Yes, people just like you who want to help sponsor our little podcast. There's so much we can do together. If you are hooked to help, contact us right now at hookedonlifethepodcast@gmail.com and in the subject line say, I want to help. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Podbean. And we want to thank you for continuing to support Hooked on Life.
This portion of today's podcast is brought to you by Playhouse North Acting Studios. Founded by Cindy McCauley in 2004, they offer professional-level training that provides students with a competitive edge that's needed in today's industry. They provide the tools necessary to build a solid foundation, find freedom and confidence in the actor's approach to the work. Using the Meisner technique, they are committed to a positive setting for students to train and cultivate a lifelong practice through a professional approach. For more information on upcoming sessions, contact them at playhousenorthstudios@gmail.com.
Welcome back. Welcome back to our little podcast called Hooked on Life, the podcast. We are so thrilled that you are joining us today on our next episode, our 15th episode.
Is it the 15th episode?
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
can you believe that?
Congratulations.
There you go. Congratulations to you, dear. My God. So let's, without further ado, we just had a little welcome committee talk all about what he does by my wife, Cindy. So let's just get this started because I think he's ready to go. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our very dear friend, very, very dear friend, Mr. Raoul Bhaneja.
Hello. Hey, ho, hi. How are you guys?
Great to see you, man.
Well, let's be honest. You can't really see me because I'm sitting in a tiny little vocal booth with the camera off because I'm sitting in it naked because it's so hot. Not because I'm so hot. I'm not making that claim. So you don't want to see that. No one wants to see that. Your opinion of me would just start to go, he's so sweaty.
Oh, you're hot, dude. Oh, you are hot.
It's like he was really nervous and sweaty the whole interview.
Oh, you're hot, Raoul. We have a bromance going on and you have no idea yet. You are hot, buddy. Okay, well, let's get started. Why don't you talk about yourself? Tell us about yourself. You're a multifaceted actor, musician, singer, all of that. Why don't you share with us how that all came to be and where you are now?
Well, the most important thing in all of this is how I met Shaner. Come on, let's be clear. Shane used to work at the counter at Steve's Music on Queen Street West, about 4 minutes from where I used to live when I first moved to Toronto. And I would go in there, and I realized when I was listening to your episode with my friend Jeff Douglas, I realized, you must have you came from Calgary, which I didn't know. But I was like, okay, so you would have come to Calgary right at the turn of the century. So I would have seen you right when you first came to town. Because it's way back. Like, we go back to 2000 then, or 2001. Like, it's that far back. But I would come in and I'd be looking for harmonicas because I'm a musician as well as an actor. And I'd come and Shane would be there. And, you just always, people were cool there and people were nice. And, but you were just by far the most sort of like friendly, positive person at that counter. And I've come to realize that, of course, you're not from Toronto. Because when I first came to town, one night I was seeing a band. It was a great band that played here in the late 90s, early 2000s. Some of us Gen Xers who are in Toronto will remember there was kind of a swing and jump blues revival before the fucking Gap ad came out. Okay. As soon as the Gap ad came out, it was over. We knew we were screwed. But prior to the Gap having like guys in chinos, Lindy hopping, there was a really cool scene in Toronto of people playing early jazz, jump music and swing. And so I was up at Ted's Wrecking Yard, which was on College Street. And there was a band that used to play there. Barcode. The place was called Barcode, and Ted from Ted's Collision used to run it. And there was a band that played there every Wednesday night, I think it was, called the Swing Gang, who were awesome. And I was there one night, and there was some people from Second City there who I'd sort of met through another way. And I came up and I was talking to one of my friends, and there was another guy sitting there, and he was from Alberta. He was from Edmonton. And after I left, my friend told me this after. He said, first thing when I left the table, he said, hey, that guy's not from Toronto. And they said, how do you know? He said, well, he came over and he introduced himself and he like shook my hand and he was really friendly. And now I realized the reason you were like a nice guy at the counter on Queen Street West is that you hadn't become like automatically a cynical Torontonian. You were actually like a positive Albertan. I know so many nice Albertan people. My life is full of amazing people I know from Edmonton and Calgary. So many artists, musicians, actors, improvisers, so many amazing people. So now it all makes sense to me. When I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, you were a nice guy from Calgary who hadn't been poisoned by cynical bullshit attitudes on Queen Street. So yeah, that's where I met you. And I just, and over the years, it's funny, man, we just kind of, years have gone by where we haven't seen each other, and, we're in touch on Facebook, and then, and then I realized, through Cindy, that I know a whole other bunch of group of people you guys all know from the whole theater world and the acting world. So anyways, I just wanted to say that because, it's not like you just, I'm talking to someone who has been an acquaintance for over 20 years. And it's not just like, it's not like you guys Facebooked me and said, hey, we'd like you to be on the podcast. It's like, oh no, it's Shaner, man, from Steve's, handed me a Honer Marine Band harmonica and this little thing called a bellows.
What is a bellows?
You see, when you go into a store and you want to buy a harmonica, you can't take it out of the container and put it in your mouth, because guess what? You just put it in your mouth. So Hohner, the harmonica company, invented this weird little sort of squeezy wooden sort of bagpipey thing where you just line the harmonica up along a little opening, and you press this thing and the air pushes through it like a bellows. And it's the dumbest thing in the world because it doesn't at all duplicate how it is to actually play harmonica, but it's all we got. So Shannon would throw that on the counter and he'd go, "Oh, okay, you want a Marine band and C? All right, here we go." And we go, "Hee ha, hee ha, hee ha." And so that's where I first got to know you. But of course, I knew you were a musician, and I knew you had your own stuff going on, as a lot of the guys working at Steve's did. But yeah, I remember those days fondly, man. It was so cool to have like a giant music store 4 minutes from where I lived. And I was in there all the time buying guitar strings, looking at guitars and amplifiers I couldn't afford. And okay, that's what I wanted to say before I said anything else.
Where did you live? Were you in Trinity Bellwoods, or were you on Queen? Where did you live?
I lived in a city home, rent control building on Venali, man. So it goes on Queen, you go heading west, Spadina, Cameron House, first place I ever had a job in Toronto as a busboy and a horrible bartender. Second block over is a little dead end street called Venali. And my girlfriend and now my wife, we lived together there in a rent controlled apartment on Venali for years and years and years. And then we were lucky enough, we'd saved up enough money. And we bought a place, we bought like the cheapest place on our street 20 years ago out here in Parkdale. So we're sort of in the Queen and Lansdowne area now. But I've never lived more than a half block north of Queen Street.
There was a coffee shop on Venality right on the corner. Is it still there? I'm not sure. Is the coffee shop there?
Wait, because no, when you go, the next one after Venali is Augusta, which had the KFC on the corner. It's now a hole in the ground. So it's just this little dead end street. It had Winston's corner store on the corner, which is still there. The Winston family used to own that. They were really cool. They were Chinese Jamaican people. So it was that awesome total Toronto thing. I'd never met anyone who was Chinese looking and then spoke with a Jamaican accent. That was like such a Toronto moment for me 30 years ago, because I grew up in Ottawa. So it was a pretty straightforward kind of town. The main thing in Ottawa is that you were French or English. It wasn't so much that you were, of this ethnicity or that ethnicity. And I came to Toronto and I felt so at home here because there were lots of people who were mixed like me. Like my dad's from India, my mother's from Ireland. And so I showed up here and I was like, oh yeah, man, this is a place, first of all, full of people who are from everywhere. And secondly, a lot of people are not from just one place or one culture or one background or one religion. They're made up of all these components. So the Winstons were so cool because they were like these incredibly friendly, really nice people, but it was so cool because it was so unusual to me. I thought, oh yeah, a Chinese looking person will sound like this, whether, maybe they'll have no accent because they've lived in Canada forever, or maybe they just got here and they'll have a heavy Chinese accent of some kind. And then these guys had these awesome Jamaican accents. And I was like, wow, Toronto, you're cool.
Did you get the bug from acting in Ottawa, or did you come to Toronto from Ottawa with that in mind? Like, how did that all come about?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of us who are Gen Xers, we look at the young generation now, and it's just a different kind of way of thinking. When I got into acting, I was sort of it was like just before high school. I grew up out of the country for a couple of years, and in the school I was at out in Europe, I did like school plays and I learned, I was taught guitar and I started to sort of get into that. And I realized I really like performing and being in front of people. And then someone visited us in Germany and said, hey, I know you're moving back to Ottawa. My dad's job was finishing. They said, oh, well, I know you're moving back to Ottawa and there's an arts high school there called Canterbury High School. So I was like, okay, you audition to get into that. All right. I was in grade 7 going into grade 8. So I knew when I came back to Ottawa, I had a whole year to kind of prepare. And I was really lucky. I got into that school, Canterbury. It's had all kinds of people have graduated, but it was a typical art school. It had like visual art, dance, drama, instrumental music, vocal music, all these different departments. So I really got into it there. And then I was lucky out of high school, I got into the National Theatre School of Canada in Montreal. And that's where I met your friend of mine, Jeff Douglas, who was at Concordia at the same time. And when I finished at the National Theatre School in 1996, my girlfriend who I'd met in Ottawa had decided to come to Toronto to finish off her university degree and see if she could become a professional actor with a good friend of ours, Stephanie Moore. So they were roommates. And when I finished school, I realized like I had no facility with French that could have made me an actor in Quebec of any kind. As much as I love Montreal.
Did you think about going out west at all?
I'd never even been to Vancouver at that point. It seemed like it was the other side of the world, and it kind of is. And my girlfriend had moved to Toronto, and I'd been going back and forth to Toronto during school. You know, when she moved here, I got a job here one summer, and I'd take the Greyhound bus at midnight. But we were really like very much a generation of specialists. So I really specialized early, right? So I went to an arts high school for acting and drama. I left an arts high school, and I went to a diploma program in acting. And when I was 21, going on 22, I graduated, and I was like, okay, now I guess I'm going to become an actor because I have absolutely no other qualification, skill, or desire to do anything else. So Toronto seemed to be the only place to come. I look at kids now, they have to be, they're much more generalists. Their approaches, they're generalists. They don't necessarily specialize to that degree because it might actually not be a good idea. But a lot of us Gen Xers, we were pretty much like, okay, well, what are you going to be? Are you going to be a dentist? Well, if you're going to be a dentist, you better go be a dentist school. Or if you're going to be an actor, you better go study acting and do it like this. And also, we didn't have that access, to the technology. The digital world was so different that, there was no way for you to be a young actor going like, oh, well, I'll just kind of make my own thing and like get in my own way and create my own quote unquote content and just put it out there and see what happens. I'm not saying that's been a way it works for everybody, because of course the vast majority of content doesn't turn you into Justin Bieber or whatever actor who gets noticed from their short movies that they make at home. But there was almost no way to get access to the mainstream unless you came through, the system, and you had to get in the line of the system. And I guess for me, I pretty much put all my cards down on being a performer.
What was the first thing you did when you landed in Toronto?
I done this really cool show at a place called the Blythe Festival, which is out in southwestern Ontario. It was a show about the CKNX barn dance, which was this from the late 20s to the 1960s, was a touring country show in southwestern Ontario that used to do live radio broadcasts from these small towns, from Wingham and Owen Sound. And I played one of the guys who was at the time still alive. And so I got to interview him and meet all of his family. And I had this incredible experience. And I got to work with this legendary Canadian theater director, Paul Thompson. And he had done this show, The Farm Show, which is the first like collective theater show that had ever been done in Canada.
Yeah, profound influence on Canadian theater. I believe the winner of the Governor General's Award and the Order of Canada, I think.
And so that was my first job out of school. So I showed up to Toronto just like, basically wearing a laurel, just like, bring it on. I'm here, Toronto. Raoul has arrived. Like, where's the red carpet? Where are the jobs? And of course, I sat here and didn't work at all. And I just got so terrified that it was going to be harder than I hoped it was going to be. And I also got really frustrated sitting at home waiting for the phone to ring, which is kind of the actor's dilemma. Once you're in this kind of system, and particularly back then when there were not as many opportunities, you had to either create your own theater company and create your own work, which I ended up doing in the end, or you had to wait for your agent to call you and say, hey, I've got you this audition tomorrow or next week, get ready. So I got really frustrated waiting around, and I'd been to some of the jams around Toronto, at Grossman's and at the old Chicago's upstairs, the Bird Nest, where Jeff Healey used to play sometimes, and Jerome Godbout and all those guys. And I met a guitar player, this guy, Darren Gallant. We're totally different. Like he's from Toronto, totally different guy. We're different in every single way. But the first time we got up and played together, we just kind of clicked. And this year's the 25th year we've been playing together in our band.
Wow.
Completely random. And he helped put the band together because he knew more Toronto players than I did. And our drummer, Tom Bona, has been with us probably 24 and a half years. Like, he joined pretty early on. And I started the band because I hated that feeling of being so powerless and waiting for the phone to ring. And I needed to have a thing in my life as a performer that I had more control over. Like, okay, I'm going to perform on this night. I'm going to make the phone. I'm not waiting for someone to call me. I'm going to call this club, or I'm going to drop off my crappy cassette demo tape or whatever. I'm going to take the initiative and this part of my creative life I need to have some control over, because the other end of it, I'm completely at the beck and call of the people who want to hire me.
Oh, yeah. Good thinking.
Well, it was desperate. It was desperate. There weren't a lot of other options. And then what I ended up doing as the years went on, I didn't find a place it was weird. Like, I had breaks in TV and film. Some TV and film stuff came easier and quicker to me than theater, even though I'd been to the National Theater School, and, I'd go to the Tarragon and I'd audition for a show, and I'd be like, oh, I can't audition. I don't look like Gordon Pinson's son. I don't look like R.H. Thompson's son. I don't look like this guy's son. So as a young person, you're often playing somebody's kid. If you're 20, you're like the son of this actor, the son of this character. And so I was surprised at how restricted the casting was for me then in the theater. I kind of knew TV would be weird, because TV's always weird. And there weren't a ton of people who looked like me on TV. I didn't think that much about it back then, but I thought, no, like, I'm trained in the theater. I can do anything. And I've trained to do anything. So, like, hire me. And then I really found that the opportunities were, again, hard to get because it's so competitive. First of all, that's the main thing. There's a million people trying to do it. And Toronto's full of really good actors who know what they're doing. And there's only so few jobs. But I started to realize I needed to kind of create in the theater. Then I had to create my own opportunities, because even in the theater, I couldn't kind of get what I wanted. So I've sort of spent a lot of my life, 25 years into 27 years into being a professional actor and or a musician. I spent a lot of time kind of creating my own opportunities, because I found, like, in the mainstream, for kind of a funny looking Indian Irish guy, even though I was very lucky to go to the National Theater School, that gave me a lot of, like, sort of legit cred when I first came out. I still dealt a lot with people saying, like, oh yeah, we don't really know where he'll fit, or it's not really quite the right look. He's really good, but we're not really sure if this part looks right for him. So, I kind of was like, man, I am going to go crazy. Like, I'm just going to go crazy if I don't get to show the world what I can do. And then ironically, as the years go on, it actually turns out, now people know who you are, and you've done all this groundwork, and you've been in all these shows, and you've made all these opportunities for yourself, and now people want you to be in all these things, and now you're too busy doing your own thing, so you can't.
So, Raoul, Shay and I were talking about this morning, this idea of generating your own opportunities. I would like to take it back a moment to you in Ottawa as a young Gen Xer. And do you feel that ability that you have to really seize the day, go out and find work, be creative in terms of creating your own opportunities, do you think that came from the environment that you grew up in?
Well, one thing that we've had to deal with is Generation X. And I can kind of see, being a parent now and having teenagers, I can kind of see the positive side of it. But for a long time, the negative side of Gen X was that, with the baby boomers in front of us, they were such a special kind of privileged generation in a way that, like, my parents are from the generation before baby boomers, they're wartime. Both my parents are born in the Second World War. My dad was born in India, but India had just been divided in two. My whole family were refugees from Pakistan and had to move to India. So, like, in a very early age, all kinds of tumult and conflict and earth-changing societal stuff going on. My mom was born, my grandfather was an Irishman working in a British factory in Coventry. And my mom was born basically in the opening weeks of the Battle of Britain, and was, sent back to Ireland with my grandma, and my grandfather stuck it out while the place got bombed because he had to make a living. So, when your parents come from that, I think that made a bit of a difference, like, my parents didn't come from, my dad's from the third world. My mom's from the second world. I mean, Ireland wasn't really a first world nation. So in some ways growing up, and my parents were both immigrants to Canada. They both came in the 60s with basically no money and not much of an education, and ended up meeting each other in Ottawa and started a life together. And my dad had this amazing career. He became a Canadian diplomat. He's like probably one of the first South Asian Canadians to ever represent Canada as a diplomat, so. Oh, wow. Like, there's nothing I could do that would kind of match what my dad did. So, but one cool thing about my folks is my dad never brought up that he was never going on about how hard it was because he came from here, or that he wasn't white, or that he wasn't, like, he never dwelt on that stuff. He just put his head down and did his job and did his work. My mom did too in her own way. She looked after us at home most of the time. So it was pretty straightforward and hardworking. But the challenge we had as I got older, and I think a lot of Gen Xers have, is that the baby boomers basically were like, oh yeah, like I'm here doing this for as long as I want. And I'm not getting out of the way for you because I still want to do this thing, whatever it is. Like I hear baby boomer musicians, baby boomer actors who are like 75 being like, yeah, man, it sucks. I don't work as much anymore. And I'm like, you're 75, man. I love these people, but I'm like, you have played since you were 20 years old and you're 75. And I'm not saying you should run off and die or curl up and die, not at all. But, you know, for the health of the society, for the health of our world, the people under you need opportunity. And I think one thing the Gen Xers have had to deal with, and one reason I think I became someone who made my own opportunity, is there was also a glut of baby boomers in front of me who weren't going to let me in. And I think a lot of us in different industries and jobs felt that as Gen Xers, like, and some of us had our parents, you know, we may have been, you know, compared to kids these days, of course, yeah, I had way more independence. I could go ride my bike at night. I could jump over a fence and cut my face open and have to go to the hospital. Sure. Yeah. Like we had all that stuff. And it was safer, you know, still there was stuff that went down, but it didn't feel the same way it feels now. And also I didn't live in a big city like Toronto. But at the same time, as much as I value that independence I had and that ability to just kind of like, you know, problem solve and just do things, I didn't have to be really handheld as much. I think I had a kind of confidence that I could just do it because no one else was going to show me, no one else was going to tell me. So why wouldn't I do it? I feel now when I talk to young people, there's a lot of phobias and fears around what they can't do. We just didn't have an opportunity to think about it. And perhaps to the baby boomers' credit, they didn't stop us in that way. They were just not going to ever fully let us in. I mean, that's why America's got Trump and Biden is the best way to say it. I'm not saying anything politically. I'm not talking about that. But the fact that two, like, basically almost 80-year-old guys are the choice of our society for who should lead is sort of a perfect example of like how the baby boomer ethos has totally been in our way. And now we're 50-year-old people or older. I'm 49 actually, but you know what I mean? We're of this age. And my philosophy is sort of that I don't want to be someone who takes a spot. And I really feel as a Gen Xer, my responsibility is to the earlier generations, particularly the younger people. Like millennials, I think will kind of have it figured out. And a lot of them are already having to kind of navigate the post 9/11 world and the pandemic and blah, blah, like the climate change. Like they're in the thick of it, the millennials. But the generations under the millennials, I feel like it's my job. I want to be there to help them through and not to clog up the way for them. And if they want to get into political activity, if they want to get into leadership positions in arts organizations, you know, that's what we need. We need 30-year-old people running these things and learning on the job. Not everybody needs to be, you know, it can't just be people who are like, my joke in the Canadian theater is that, you know, it'll be a male artistic director will announce, I've got an important announcement to make, and there'll be a press release, and he'll say, 7 years from now, I will be finally resigning my position as artistic director. You're like, guys, like, you know, like, come on.
Do you think that the pandemic shifted that a little bit?
I think the pandemic has accelerated a lot of that. I think there's new opportunities for people. But I mean, I think in terms of growing up, I was formed by my parents who kept things pretty straightforward. They were two hardworking immigrants who did their thing and didn't really, my dad was sort of proof that there was no obstacle in society. There wasn't really a barrier. He proved everybody wrong. He proved you know, the only thing he didn't become was an ambassador for Canada. Well, all kinds of people don't become ambassador. So I'm sure that would have been a goal in his life he would have liked to have. You know, he went from a guy who was a student who'd come to study journalism in Canada, who was, you know, had a janitor overnight vacuuming shift at Zellers in Ottawa. And then, you know, 20 years later, he was representing Canada as a diplomat. So
that's really, really amazing.
You know, that was an example of like, okay, go do it. Like whatever you want to do, go do it. I find it very hard to tell my kids that it'll be, because once I start having those conversations with my kids now, it's like, yeah, well, who knows if we'll even be here?
Yeah, we hear that in our home too.
You know, climate change, man, like the world might be on fire in 20 years. Like we might all be dead. And I'm like, oh God. We had the day after, I thought we were going to be annihilated by nuclear war. I lived in West Germany. The sirens would be tested in our playground. The air raid sirens would be tested. F-16s or whatever, F-12, 14s, whatever they were in the 1980s would fly right over us and break the sound barrier. They'd be doing drills. If the Russians pressed the button when I lived in Germany, 1983 to 1987, we were dead in minutes. We didn't have hours for that missile to get all the way across the ocean and come and land and, hug our loved ones. I would have died in school, man. I would have been vaporized in school. Like, that was our fear, and it was real. But at the same time, the kids right now, they face a kind of existential crisis. I mean, and they probably do. So I find it hard to talk to them about the future because a lot of them don't feel like they have one. And that makes me sad. Didn't answer your question. That was like something I just felt I had to say. I will say this about the 80s. When I grew up, I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I thought I wanted to be an archaeologist. I really did. And I did a class project on archaeology. I even got to go to what used to be called the Museum of Man. Now it's called, I think, the Museum of Canadian History or something. It's in Ottawa, a Museum of Nature, I think it's called. And I got to meet an archaeologist, and he took me back into like this sort of show area lab thing. And he basically showed me like, okay, here's like a model of the different colors of Earth. And this is 5,000 years ago, and this is 10,000 years ago, and this is 100,000 years ago. And I remember standing there going like, oh my God, this is so boring. Like, where's the whip? Where's the hat? Where's the punching the Nazis in the face? And then I realized, oh man, I don't want to be an archaeologist. I want to be an actor, because it's an actor that gets to do that. Not an archaeologist. An archaeologist has to go, sleep in a tent and, dust off clay pots for weeks. I've got a friend from elementary school who went on to be an archaeologist. He's done incredible digs all over the world, but I was like, he's about as close to Indiana Jones as anybody I know. But so I kind of realized like I wanted to be an actor, and so that's I like to think of that as one of my Gen X revelations, that I can really credit Raiders of the Lost Ark as basically setting me on my life journey. That's a Gen X thing, right? Like, that's legit, right?
We're both fans of Raiders of the Lost Ark for sure, but we're also fans of Back to the Future. So let's go back in time. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Raoul Bhaneja.
So the pandemic really did change a lot in terms of our worlds that we work in. And I know that the entertainment industry was no different. Through the pandemic, actors learned how to do self-tapes. Streaming services became really popular.
For sure.
There were different movements that permeated through the pandemic and pre-pandemic, like the Me Too movement, et cetera, et cetera. Have you really seen the changes that have come through in terms of intimacy coaches and different ways of working and how to get hired? And how has that effect been on you as a working artist? And do you think those changes are positive changes for the industry or negative?
Wow. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, it's a pretty complicated answer. I was very, just to kind of try to keep it less theoretical and more practical in terms of my own experience. I was very busy producing my own theater productions that were touring across Canada in the sort of middle of the last decade. I had a show called Life, Death, and the Blues that I did at Passe Muraille that I took to a bunch of cities across Canada. I had been touring this one-man Hamlet show I'd been doing for a long time called Hamlet Solo. And then I brought a show to Edmonton that I'd also done in Toronto called Disgraced. That was all kind of like middle of the tens, basically, around there. And, when the whole sort of hashtag Oscars So White thing started, and I finally started to hear people say that they acknowledged that there was an imbalance. Because remember, when I was telling you when I was starting in the 90s, people couldn't really see it. And it wasn't that, it's because it was systemic, it was very deep. And people didn't think there was anything wrong with saying, well, you're half Indian, so you can't play this person's son in this play. And you'd be like, it's a play. It's a play. Like, what does it matter? And they'd be like, oh, well, no, you're not going to look like his kid. And then you'd see whoever was cast and you'd be like, no, well, they don't look like his kid either. They're just not half of another race. So, but people wouldn't see it. And the compliment, the weird sort of quote unquote compliment I used to get was like, oh, well, we don't even think of you that way. Because of course I'm half white. So I had all kinds of privilege that my darker skinned fellow peers and actors of that time did not have. And I have fully acknowledged that, because the fact that even though I had this funny Indian last name, which probably hampered the beginning of my career to some degree, I also had kind of access because I was sort of different, but not too different. So when the hashtag Oscars So White thing started to kick off, 2016, 2015, 16, 17, I kind of decided, do I want to be on the sidelines in TV and film, which I'd done a lot of up to that point, but had kind of started to let slip away because it had been so uninteresting and I hadn't had the opportunities I thought I deserved. And I thought, wow, if this thing really takes off, if all of a sudden the casting thing changes and anybody can play everything and it would be really dumb time to be stuck like with a schedule that doesn't allow you to do any TV or film work.
Yeah.
So I started focusing again on television and film like 2016, 2017. I did a movie called Miss Sloane with Jessica Chastain that shot here in Toronto, which was a great sort of reintroduction to being back in the movies again and being in something big with and it was an amazing movie to be working on because it was, I had all these scenes with Sam Waterston and John Lithgow and, just like these absolute, and Jessica Chastain, who's an incredible actor.
She did Zero Dark 30, right?
Yeah, exactly. She had done Zero Dark 30 and John Madden was directing it, who'd done Shakespeare in Love. Like it was a complete pinch me kind of job, and so I was like, okay, if I'm going to try to get back into TV and film, I just was fortunate to get this job, luckily. So let me use this as my way to get back in. So I will say the last 6 years or so, except for that thing called the pandemic. So let's call it 3 years. I did put my focus back on it. And things have changed. It's good. It's definitely good that more diverse actors have opportunities. When it comes to Me Too, I feel like there's been progression for women in television and film, but they still face many of the same obstacles. I do think I've markedly noticed the increase in female directors on projects I work on. There were many more women directing in the theater during my kind of professional career. So that was not unusual to have a female director in the theater since the late 90s, but it was unusual to be directed by a woman in television. I could count the women I was directed on television in the first, say, 10 years of my career. I could probably count on one hand or two hands. Now the majority of people I'm directed by in television or film are women. So that's one sort of experiential, concrete thing where I can be like, hey, this has changed for women, and that's great.
That is really great.
A bit selfishly, I suppose, another way it's kind of changed is that now if things are getting hyper specific, and again, I get it. We want to give opportunity to people who are of certain backgrounds and certain things because they haven't had those opportunities before, and maybe they can bring a kind of authenticity to it. But sort of one of the fun things about being an actor is that you get to be different people and different types of people.
Right. Yes, exactly.
And for me, if every character I have to audition for needs to be Irish and Indian, boy, I better write all my own TV series because that's not an ethnic type that people are thinking of very often. As interesting as it is, I'm proof of how interesting it is, but it's not, it's not something people write. So that part of it, just purely on the very selfishly speaking, on the acting side, I worry about things getting so specific that, I almost don't know a straight actor who will play a gay part anymore. And I get that. And there's lots of gay people in show business, and that's been one of the awesome things about show business. But I wouldn't want it to be like, oh, well, that gay woman can't play a straight woman. I wouldn't want that gay guy can't play a straight guy. That's not fair either. So I don't want it to get that specific whereby all kinds of people are excluded. So, it's generally positive. It's moving quite slowly. It's been weaponized, unfortunately. The number of actors of color who've had people say to their face, oh, it's a great time to be you, or, oh, I was up for that part, but, it went diverse. It went to one of those actors of color. That it's been used as an excuse. And so people think oh, well, I didn't get that because some, dark-skinned actor got it. And it's well, actually, you didn't get it because you didn't get it. Okay. And all kinds of other people, before, when you didn't get a part, you didn't go oh, well, that part's going to red-haired girls, and that's the only reason I got it. Sure, if you were auditioning for Anna Green Gables, fine. But outside of Anna Green Gables, no, it was like, yeah, that other girl got it. That sucks. I hate her. I wish she always gets my parts or whatever. But this became this kind of weird mantra that casting directors would use and agents would use as a way to kind of tell their clients why they didn't get work. And of course, in some cases, it is because a diverse person got the job, finally. And now you know what it's like to be singled out for how you look. And now you know what it's like to be excluded from a whole bunch of things. Sorry, it sucks. But it was sort of weaponized in a way that if the numbers had been true, like people had been told, every single person on television would have been black. Every single show would have been directed by a Chinese woman. And every television executive would be an Indian man. And I can just tell you that ain't the truth.
I think every director should be a fat Jesus.
Yeah. The Big Lebowski, man. Let's go for it. And also, inside all of this, we have to be careful not to throw away people with experience. And as much as I was saying, like, I don't think baby boomers need to continue to clog things up. But I do think there's a reality to our life where we owe it to the generations coming under us that not only we don't even, it's one thing to mentor people and say, stay in your place. And there was a lot of that for the millennials and some for Gen Xers, right? Where people got mentored and got apprenticeships and, worked under some guy and the guy wouldn't leave and he'd never leave. And he'd turn 65 and he wouldn't leave. He'd be like, no, I still feel I'm having a great time. I love making this money. I still feel like working. And guys are working until they're 75 and hey, that's awesome. They're still alive. Good for them. They're not dead. Awesome. But the flip side to it is there needs to be opportunity for people who are younger to grow and to benefit from space. And one thing Gen Xers can do is that we know what it's like to wait in line. And if any generation is going to be generous, if any generation is not going to have their head so far up their ass, it needs to be us looking to those younger generations and saying, okay, you got to go do your thing now. I'm here if you need me. I'm here for advice. I'm here to help. If I was you, I would do this, but you got to go your own way. But trust me, I've been through this part of it. I can help you if you want my help. But here's the space for you to go do your thing. And frankly, I think there's going to be more answers about the world coming from 30-year-olds than there are 80-year-olds right now, particularly with the challenges we're going to have even in my business, our business around AI and technology and all this shit that's going to hit the fan and transform the whole thing. In a way, I'd rather be 30 because that person's brain and experience and relationship to the digital world and technology is more ready to roll with what's going to happen. Some of us, there was a guy who used to live above the Cameron House. And in typical Cameron House style, if you saw him, he used to change the kegs and you'd look at this guy and go, man, who is this guy? He'd kind of shuffle in and he'd have his glasses on the top of his head. And God, when I knew him, he must have been well into his late 60s. He'd be missing teeth and his clothes would be dirty. It was Bill. I was like, oh yeah, it's Bill, the guy who lives upstairs at the Cameron House on Queen Street. Well, of course, Bill was a guy who used to write speeches for prime ministers and he was a fucking philosopher. And Bill wrote this book called Quantum Jump, which is an amazing book before he died. But a phrase I always remember that he wrote in it. And of course, it blew my mind that this guy was, of course, basically a genius living above the Cameron House. There's a few of them. Kevin Quain. There's a few. Video Cab Theater was started above the Cameron House. Some genius people there. But he said, beware of falling dinosaurs. And I always thought that's a really good thing. And Gen Xers, we know what that means. Don't be standing beside the dinosaur when it falls over. And because why? You'll get crushed.
Yes, agreed.
And so, we've seen that happen. We've seen how the digital age has completely transformed companies and changed them and made things obsolete in the course of 2 years. BlackBerry, here forever, totally obsolete. We've seen it happen right before our eyes with all kinds of things. So I think one of the things Gen Xers can do is we can help other people say like, hey, don't stand next to the falling dinosaur, man. Like when that thing tips over, you don't want to be anywhere near it. Go forge ahead, find the next answer, find the new thing. And I'm excited to learn from young people because there's all kinds of shit I don't know and I don't understand. And I think they have a facility with it and I want to know what they think because that's where the new ideas are coming from. And they're going to determine what the world should be. Like they have to. And that's what drives me nuts is I kind of think in some ways we didn't get that opportunity or, we had to be like angry in our basements about it. Now we've got a few Gen Xers in power, but we'll be gone soon. There won't be that many Gen Xers in power. And I'm okay with that. But the baby boomers were in power for like 40 years. And then the Gen Xers are going to be in power for like 5 to 10 years. And then it'll be millennials and everybody else's turn. And I kind of think that to me sort of like, if you think of it about like prime ministers and leaders around the world, that kind of sums it up for me. It'll be like, oh yeah, we had a good run. It was 5 to 7 years and we waited our entire lives for it. But that's why we needed to be resourceful and we needed to make our own stuff. We couldn't just wait in line. We had to be a bit more innovative and a little more risk taking, because what else other opportunity we were going to have? If you didn't start your own thing, in a lot of cases, unless you were really lucky, if you didn't start your own band, or in your case, start your own acting school, start your own theater company, like if you didn't do that stuff, guess what? There was somebody ahead of you who was going to keep doing their thing for another 20 years and you were never going to get a chance.
So, Raoul, what would your advice to the younger generation be?
Well, I mean, I think I kind of yelled about some of that already. Yeah, it's very hard for me to say, because I do think while some of our circumstances are the same, I don't think it's like directly applicable, because, they've grown up in a completely different internet age, digital environment. And not that we're not 100 years old. We all know how to do this stuff, but I do think there's something to the pre-internet brain. Like we have one pre-internet experience, pre-smartphone experience. Like to me, that's almost bigger than the internet. What smartphones have turned us all into. But we have some experience of what it was like not to have one of these and what all that meant pre-Facebook, pre-social media. So I feel like I can't tell them much because my experience of the before times was so different. But I guess I would say that we're probably going to make it through, because we also went through some times where we thought the world might end, and it could have, still might. But we've gotten this far. Like a lot of us are in our late 40s or 50s, and we're here. Like we've made it this far. So I hope for all of our sakes that when it comes to some of these bigger existential threats that they're facing now, and I guess the big one has to be climate change, and then probably, huge societal inequity.
Yeah, Russia right now.
Yeah, like, the huge inequality in the world and in our own societies, where, we have people who have billions and people have nothing. And there's the disparity between the poorest and the richest is so great. And where the richest have, it's a handful of people that have a tremendous amount of the wealth in the world. Like that can't be very good or sustainable for too long. So those are huge things that weren't really a part of our era as much, Yeah, for the generation who grew up just before the Great Depression, yeah, that's what it was like for them. But, those guys are almost 100 years old now, so there's not as many of them around. So I think you're probably going to be okay. So hopefully that helps with the anxiety and the stress and the fear and the self-doubt and the anxiety and all. Like we just didn't have names for it back then. We weren't allowed, but of course people struggle with their mental health and addiction. And we had all those things. We just didn't know how to talk about it. And I think one hope I have for the kids is that, and when I'm talking kids, I'm talking about the young, like kids my age, my kids' ages of 13, 18, that while there's a lot of fears and phobias and anxieties driven by I don't know exactly what, there is a kind of level of articulateness around it that I think is positive, that I think in our day, like you couldn't really say, like, man, the only kids I knew who ever went to a therapist were like kids who were having a really rough go of it.
Yeah. And there were not many mental health benefit programs back in the day, were there?
Right. Like, and kids who got to go to therapy as Gen Xers whose parents could afford it, or they were in that kind of care. I'm glad they got it, but just from the outside, like it was maybe a rich kid whose parents had been divorced and they could afford to send them to a psychiatrist or somebody, or it was like a kid who was in children's services and was having like a time that I couldn't even imagine. But the way young people talk about mental health now, I'm like, this hopefully will help. I think it will. I hope it does, because otherwise you have all this information, you can't do anything with it. But I think I see the evidence. I think I do from young people just being a bit mindful of it. But, of course, the flip side is, well, you weren't tough. You got to suck it up. You got to fight. You got to push. But I have hope that they'll find their own way through that, because they're still going to have to look after themselves. There's not going to be this. In fact, there's going to be a whole generation of old people that need looking after, FYI. So they're going to have to figure out a way to do all this and hopefully not resent everyone who's come before them for creating a world that's kind of fucked up.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to have to see what happens now, eh?
Oh, what a merry conversation. Shouldn't I just have told stories about like famous people I met? Like, come on. Now I'm talking about like the world ending. Like, do your listeners really want that? Don't they want to hear like showbiz stories? Oh, God.
Yeah, man. Well, it's all good. It's all good. Well, listen, we're coming to the rapid fire section.
Portion
of our show.
Oh, yeah.
Are you nervous, buddy?
No, I'm excited to answer in short bursts. I won't be able to rant for 15 minutes at this nonstop.
It's all good, man. Just whatever comes to mind, okay?
Yep. Okay.
McDonald's or KFC?
Yeah, it's got to be KFC.
MASH or Hill Street Blues?
MASH.
Roller rink or arcade?
Arcade. Yeah, I'm a terrible skater. Irish mom. My mom could roller skate actually, but Irish mom, Indian dad, we were not a very good ice skating, roller rinking family. Just not very good at that.
Movie time. Star Wars?
Sorry.
Oh, fuck. Fuck. You're not making my life any easier. Fucking hell.
Okay.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Star Wars? Empire Strikes Back? Or Return of the Jedi?
I have to go Empire Strikes Back. Yeah, I'm just in that. Star Wars was just a little bit before. And by Jedi, I started to think like, hey, I think Hollywood's screwing things up. Like for me, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, like, come on. Temple of Doom is garbage compared to Raiders of the Lost Ark, in my humble opinion. Yeah. Also, I was extremely offended, even as a young person, about how India was portrayed in that.
What do you think of The Last Crusade?
I liked it more. I liked it more than Temple of Doom.
Duran or Styx?
Duran.
Bike or skateboard?
Oh, bike. Yeah. I'm terrible on a skateboard. Terrible. It's the whole roller thing, like the wheels thing, feet and wheels just seems like remember when everybody rollerbladed and like every Gen Xer probably had a fucking fractured elbow? Because there was this like period where every Gen Xer was like, yeah, I'm just going to put on my rollerblades and go to work. Like, holy, that was nuts. It's crazy.
One last question. The most important. Sunrise or sunset?
I was very impressed with Jeff Douglas's answer of sunrises because it talked about a new beginning and a dawn and how he sees the sunset every night because that's when he goes to work to do his radio show. But I'm not up enough at sunrise. I can appreciate it, but why the hell am I up that early? It's got to be sunset.
Well, there you have it. There you go, Raoul. That was awesome. Listen, I want to just touch base on one thing. Our very first guest was Jeff Douglas from CBC and other areas of his life, of course. And you know him as well through your adventures of life. And the funny thing is that when I first got here in 2000, I got tickets to the Mike Bullard show back in the day when it was at the Masonic Temple down on Davenport and Yonge. And Jeff Douglas was a guest on the show promoting the I Am Canadian, Molson Canadian commercial, which is a very long time ago now. And you were on that show at one point or another, and I didn't know that. So Jeff Douglas and Cindy and myself and you, we all know each other from different avenues of life. Like, how did you get on that show? What happened there?
Yes, oddly enough, I was promoting the first movie I ever did, a film called Extraordinary Visitor with Mary Walsh and Andy Jones. And they had me on the Mike Bullard show. And so I brought my amp, my little tiny amp and my microphone. And I said, hey, do you think I could sit in with the band? And they were like, well, yeah, maybe. And then I could see Oren was just looking at me like, oh, God, he's some like young actor guy who thinks he can play harmonica. Like, this could be the worst thing ever. And he gets up. I get up with him. I plug in. And he's just looking at me, kind of giving me the side look. And then he's sort of like, okay, what do you want to do? And I said, why don't we do funky 12 bar and G? And he said, okay. And, Oren's flying on that bass. And we get through like a 12 bar, and he goes, okay, stop. He's good. He's going to be fine. He's good. We're good. And then, then that was like the highlight. I mean, the interview with Mike was kind of cool, but the chance to play with that band and it's just like when you spend your whole life watching talk shows, and we have so few talk shows in Canada like that, and then there's somebody sitting in with the band or the Saturday Night Live band and someone to be sitting in. And, that was just like, it was a very cool kind of talk show moment that you kind of dream of having. So, yeah. So there, your Mike Bullard reference is a good one.
Thank you, Raoul. Thank you for taking the time to be on our little show today.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, great to see you, man. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Raoul. It's really, really great to chat with you.
Toodaloo now.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Raoul Bhaneja. Awesome indeed, yeah.
And we had the opportunity to see him live in my first post-pandemic theater performance in the Seagull, Soulpepper.
That's right, downtown.
Fantastic production.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah.
Really awesome. You know what's really funny is we were thinking about having guests lined up for this show, a couple of months ago, and he popped up on a repeat of ER.
Oh, no. Grey's Anatomy, dear.
Oh, right, okay. And I said to Cindy, we were sitting on the couch, and I think I'm surfing on my phone, and I said to Cindy, oh, look, there's Raoul, and she says, you know him? And I said, of course I knew. Fuck. I said, well, yeah, I know him. And, we're friends on, social media, and we're friends on the street, and I have a bromance with him, so there you go. And Cindy said, well, let's just see if we can get him on the show. And he was so obliging. Mm-hmm. Fuck, he's so fucking obliging. So I'm so glad he was with us today. That's great.
Yeah, very interesting story of, his life and some of his ideas about boomers and being somebody that, was not typical looking back in the day. I think he brought some really interesting perspectives.
I would also say anyone that's successful in the arts probably has an interesting story.
Amen.
Because they're not just handed to you off of a silver platter.
That is very true.
Very few nepotism actors out there. There are some. Gwyneth Paltrow.
Okay, let's not get into that today. Listen, what I do want to get into...
Haley Baldwin.
...is I know that Raoul was very sweaty when he was recording, but I am now feeling very sweaty. Perhaps I'm getting it from Raoul.
You're getting your sweatiness from Raoul?
I don't know, but I'm sweaty, baby.
That's wacky. That is wacky. Okay, well, it's okay. Sweating is good. Sweating is natural, right? If you're not sweating, that's bad. I'm not an MD, but I think that's what happens.
I think I'm trying to lead us out.
Oh, okay. Well, we can lead out if you'd like.
Yeah.
I was going to lead us back in, but let's lead out. That's okay. All right, good. Well, thank you for joining us, everyone. Thank you for listening to our podcast. This is really wonderful. If you haven't already followed us, come find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Podbean, anywhere on Google. We do have an active social media team. Her name is Samantha. Hello, Samantha.
Ooh, I didn't know we were outing her today.
Well, we're just saying Samantha. There are lots of Samanthas out there, but there's only one that's special to us.
We also have a summer intern, but I don't think we're going to out them today.
No, we have an intern. Yes, right. We're growing. We are growing. Mm-hmm. This is amazing. We do have a what's it called?
Indiegogo?
We have an Indiegogo program going on, so if you want to join us with that would be great. You can find it on our Facebook page. Yeah, and there we go. Let's say this. A special thanks to Raoul Bhaneja for joining us today. That was really great. Thank you to Simon in the booth for assisting us once again. I'd like to also thank everybody at Audacity. Cindy Lynn, this has been another exciting day of interview and discussion with you, and I'm sure we'll have more discussions as the day goes on because we like to talk to each other.
We do.
Do we?
We do.
Okay, that's good. Better than a food fight in the kitchen.
Oh, that would be fun too.
No. I don't think we should do that. Oh my God. Okay, let the food fight commence. You have been listening to yet another episode of
Hooked on Life.
If you enjoyed this episode of Hooked on Life and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe to our channel. We would also love to hear from you. If you have any ideas for future Hooked on Life podcasts, feel free to drop us a line. You can stay up to date with Cindy and Shane by following them on Facebook and Instagram. And remember, don't worry about tonight's sunset, because there will always be one tomorrow. See ya!